social finance webinar series, Ethical, Environmental, and Everyone. We wanted to start this series in this the interesting times that we live in order to think about together with other people working on alternative and social finance about how to achieve a more people-oriented economy and how to use the expertise and resources that are already out there to rebuild and have and think about what we want the future to look like. So we hope you are inspired, intrigued, and engaged by the ideas that you hear. And so first off, I will give you a brief introduction to the Fair Finance Fund. We're the host of this webinar series. The Fair Finance Fund is, and I should introduce myself, I'm Sally Miller. I am the ED of the Fair Finance Fund. And we are offering this series. We've been doing it for a couple of months and it's going to go into July, and we've been bringing in experts from all over the world. So we have some people coming from the United Kingdom in some of the upcoming ones, and some people from the US, as well as more examples of great social finance funds in Canada. So the next one, we do it every other Thursday. The next one's the 28th. May 28th. So to give you an overview of why we see this as important right now, I think the question is, why do we want to think about social finance in Canada? We have a lot of things on our mind right now. The reason is that social enterprises, which are businesses that are committed to community, positive community benefits, often environmental benefits, social benefits, they often face barriers to capital. So there's a real lack of understanding of some of the models, particularly co-ops. Often co-ops are not able to get the same kind of access to capital through conventional financial institutions that other businesses can do. Often these are innovative models in early stage, so we're looking at more of a shift to sustainable agriculture. Often these young farmers who are innovating in sustainable agriculture and perennial permaculture and things like that, it's not well understood within conventional agricultural financing. So we're seeing some really important innovations happening in the food system, and we're seeing the conventional capital system lagging behind that. At the same time, we know that impact investing is on the rise, so that among individual investors and foundations that have impact investing policies, they are starting to look at putting their funds into enterprises that are more of a match with their social mission. So rather than just sort of conventional investments, they're putting part of their portfolio into investing where their beliefs are. And as I said, as we look at some food system transformation and moving to more sustainable agriculture and climate resilient agriculture, we're looking at needing new kinds of capital and new ways of assessing loan applications. And that's where social finance can step in. We're focused on the local food and farm sector, but you'll be hearing today from people who are focused on other sectors, renewable energy and other things that are part of social finance. So who's the Fair Finance Fund? We incorporated in late 2018. So we've been around for about a year and a half. Our mission is to mobilize equitable and accessible capital for Ontario's local food and farm enterprises. And all of them have to show and monitor social, environmental, and economic benefits during the time of the loan. So we've got some amazing clients in our portfolio, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We do we have a very basic set of loan. We have a fixed interest rate, 6%. We issue loans between 20 and 100,000, which we found is a mid-scale area that's missed by microfinancing and then by the larger conventional financing. So it's an area that's a real gap in financing. We do offer a 90-day grace period. We don't require collateral. Our position is that we've said we're not going to seize somebody's farmland. We're going to work with them to make sure that they can pay the loan. So we have good, close relations with our clients. We get to know them quite well, and we promote them and try to help them thrive through the time of the loan. So with that in mind, one of the things we just did introduce is the Stepping Stone program, and this is our COVID response program. So recognizing that people needed fairly quick response, quick capital to be able to turn around, make a transition to respond to the new requirements for online markets and things. We issued this. This is a 1-year loan, a short-term loan. There's no payments for 12 months. All the interest and the principal are paid at the end. And they're smaller than our regular loans, so they're between 5,000 and 10,000. So they're just to help somebody get an online market going, change the way they're doing their distribution to be able to do contactless pickup and things like that. And so we're really excited about that program. We're doing a pilot for 3 months on that till the end of July, and then we'll decide if we keep going with it. We raise capital through a couple of ways. We have received some non-repayable capital through grants, and then we issue community bonds to investors, and we do that at 2 different levels. And the rates that you're seeing here are up to the end of May. The $50,000 bonds carry 4% interest, and the $5,000 bonds carry 2%. And that offering goes to May 31st. So, you know, I think often when we're giving presentations, people say, well, can we afford to do this? Can we take our money out of where we've had it for decades and think about new places to put it? So this example, we invested in a fair trade chocolate company. It saved them some money because it's a more efficient processor that roasts both their cocoa beans and their coffee beans, which is super cool. But it also reduced greenhouse gas emissions. It's more efficient, so they can do more. So this kind of thing, I think, shows that when we invest in a company like this, we're getting, it's more than just triple bottom line. It's an integrated impact that improves the environment and at the same time improves their business processes. So we look at another one. We invested in one of the first hardy fruit orchards in Northern Ontario. This is Kipling Ridge Farms up in Verner. And they are, you're seeing is a pilot of some of their apple trees. So they're replacing fruit that would have come from the south with local fruit, reducing supply chain miles. And I ask, it's not really a question of can we afford to, but can we afford not to? With climate crisis and the costs of importing from the US and things like that, we have to look at building a stronger regional food system in Canada. So that's what we're working on. So just a couple of places we have invested in. This is a fantastic organic farm in Strathroy, Ontario. These are the young people. We help them dig a well and build a pack house. We've invested in a tiger nut dairy company that does a non-dairy. It's a non-dairy frozen dessert and quite delicious. And they're growing by leaps and bounds. We also invested in a farm co-op that has a number of land-based businesses that are all part of a co-op up in Matheson, Ontario. So another northern one. And our most recent one we're very proud of, Manitoulin Island, we invested in the Split Rail Brewing Company, and they've just gone online. So if you happen to be on Manitoulin Island, you can go ahead and get their beer now delivered to your door. So my last slide, this is our 10-year impact. So this is the kind of thing that can come out of social finance. We're actually seeing 1 new job for every 10,000 that we're investing. So it's making a huge impact in the communities we're investing in. Food and agriculture is the biggest economic sector in Ontario right now. And we're looking at adding almost $1 million in additional revenues in Ontario annually. And looking at this, you can see we're tracking on the assets under management, and we are just about on track. We've raised almost $1 million in the first year and a half. So we're really proud to say that we are hitting our targets. And we look forward to many more years of doing this work. So thank you to our funders. And that's me. And I'd love to talk to any of you if you have any questions, want to follow up. And I'm going to stop the share and turn it over to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Diane Hodgins. Welcome, Diane. Yeah, to welcome you to this webinar. We're really excited to hear from you. Diane is the Chief Financial Officer of Shorefast, which is the organization behind a collection of really interesting community development projects on Fogo Island, which is a little island off the, well, it's not that little, but it's an island off the northern tip of Newfoundland. Diane uses modern business practice to help communities actively participate in the global economy. And she serves as a numeric linguist. She can explain that. She creates modern tools like the economic nutrition mark, which you can see on their website, and works with the whole Shorefast community to use community development and engage everybody in building a strong economy on Fogo Island. So we're delighted to have her, and I will let you take it. You should be able to share your screen now, Diane.
Thank you. So thank you, Sally, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for coming to the webinar today. Sally said I do call myself a numeric linguist. I'm a chartered accountant. Just as a bit of background, so I'm from Sudbury, Ontario, came to Ottawa in the 90s. I've been here for over 20 years, and I started to work with Shorefast. I was the external auditor. So I used to go out and do the the published financial statements, and so I really got introduced to the project on sort of the money and accounting side of things. And then I got to know, once I went out to Fogo Island, I got to see the geography of the place and how beautiful it was. But really the key thing for me was the people. And just as a heads up, I have a lot of photos in here. I thought a lot of us haven't seen as many bright spots lately, so I wanted to share some beautiful photography from Fogo Island. So all of the photos here are on the island. And back to that, it was just really the interaction with the community and the focus of community well-being is what brought me to bring my accounting expertise and my finance and business startup background to this project, because there's a really different way of how community business can be run. And every business activity is that we undertake is trying to approach this from a whole community benefit perspective, which was a real challenge for myself as an accountant. Very linear minded, put everything in a chart. But this project has really forced a whole different way of approaching business decisions. So I figured I would just give a bit of background on our experience in operating social businesses. We work in the social finance space, but really I'd say we are ourselves trying to get more active and learn more about how we can access social finance investment capital. So what I wanted to share today is sort of our experience in how we operate these types of businesses. This is a picture that I have hanging on my wall. Business is the ultimate art form. And I use this as a guidepost. I think people think accounting and some of the economic levers are quite dry, but I do think it's a huge opportunity for us to use business in a different way. It was something that's invented, and we just need to start orienting business in a different way. But this is a real, I think, a creative opportunity for those of the numbers people behind the scenes. The word Shorefast, just as context of what it means, it's a metaphor, and it represents the line that keeps a cod trap attached to the shore. And so it's a metaphor for may we ever be tethered to this place. And so, everything that we orient ourselves in is around place-based focus, local business, community investment. So just for context, how the name Shorefast came to be, it is a metaphor. So just to give everyone background of where Sally introduced her in Newfoundland. So here you've got the map of the world, Fogo Island in the top corner here. And then Fogo Island here, when we zoom in on Newfoundland, is north of Gander, for people that are familiar with the island. And what many people don't know about Fogo Island is actually, it's made up of 10 different cultural communities. So one of the key things that happened, and I'll go through a bit of the story, was most of Newfoundland is occupied or was originally settled by fishing communities along the coast, and Fogo Island is no different. So you see that the Atlantic is up to the north side of the island, and so most of the settlement happened there. So there's communities sprinkled across the top. The ferry comes in on the southern part of the island, and I know we've got at least one person on the call who has been to Fogo. But it's interesting how it's been approached as one economic engine, but 10 different cultural communities. So that also adds an element of challenge in how to run community business while being respectful of all of these different places with background, history, and culture. This is the cod, the humble fish that changed the world. And really everyone came and settled on Fogo Island from England and Ireland for fishing. This was how business was run in coastal communities in Newfoundland. It was family-run enterprise, wooden boats that were built by hand. And generally it was the family that would be on the boat and running until this happened. The big factory trawlers came into the big waters. The fishing in Newfoundland was all inshore fishery. So you only went out for the day, you never stayed overnight. But when the big boats came into the big waters very quickly, the fish were caught in high numbers. And this is really the landings report. So in the early 60s, the landings reports, this would be a great graph of success on the business side as landings continued to go up. But what people were not watching was the biomass. And as there was a significant drop in that biomass, it eventually led to the moratorium. So in the 1960s there is a real drop and really an economic crisis as many communities could no longer sustain their livelihoods of fishing. And the Resettlement Act came into the province where communities were essentially paid to resettle and come inland and are promised jobs. With that, though, was a huge loss of culture. Fogo Island resisted. Fogo Island actually worked with the National Film Board and Memorial University. At the time, there was it's now called the Fogo process, but there was a challenge for change where the Film Board came out, filmed different communities, and worked with Memorial's Extension Service with communities that were struggling on how to find a new economic path in the time of the moratorium. So Fogo Island was participated in this, and thanks to that, and through the learnings of the Fogo process, and all of these films are on the National Film Board site and available for those that are interested. One of the key things that many great learnings came from that experience, but one of the key things was the fishermen came together and formed the Fogo Island Cooperative. And that cooperative then started making loan applications, buying larger boats, servicing, getting debt for all of the different fishers coming together, and they built their own processing plants. So they took control back of their full, sort of the full economic cycle of the fishing. And this is really how Fogo Island has sustained a fishing enterprise. Is much of the processing plants now are done on an efficiency level basis, and they've been consolidated. So communities continue to disappear when they lose their processing. But this has definitely been the stronghold for Fogo Island, and maintaining a strong fishing economy is absolutely critical. So the founder of our project, her name is Zita Cobb. I'm sure she's a familiar name to many people. She was the CFO of JDS Uniphase. She was an 8th generation Fogo Islander. Her father was a fisherman, and they left when the fishery collapsed. She went away to school, and she left with these words from her father: it wasn't the fish that let us down. So she went to business school to really figure out, well, what system was put into place that allowed everything that she knew in the entire economic system, which was more or less a cashless society, and it had been sustainable for 300 years. You know, what happened that this couldn't continue. So she went on into her career at JDS, then retired and came back and created a charitable foundation called Shorefast. It's a federal registered charity, and doing a deep dive of what they had learned from their past and her experience of working away, came up with sort of this mantra of the goal is to contribute to the culture and economic resilience of Fogo Island, and it's important that it's both the cultural and economic combined. And we're hoping that the work that we're doing on Fogo Island is a contagious example for other places. The critical thing is that everything we do is to create a complementary leg to the fishing economy, because the culture of Fogo Island and much of Newfoundland is tied to the fishing economy. So our investment in geotourism and other businesses are always intended to complement, because without that stronghold of the original cultural focus, you lose sort of the true value, the true history of the place. This is a Gilchin Lim is a gentleman. Zita was named, I forget the exact title, but nominated for the work that's being done by Shorefast. But we use this as a guidepost, and really what we see as a new economic order possibility is a global network of intensely local places. And I think that's one of the opportunities that community finance and social finance brings, is a real intensive view of sort of place-based investment. And then how do we connect a broad network across the country and around the world with really strong local economies? The guiding principle that we use in and again, I'm sharing sort of some of the philosophy just as a background. I know this is a finance discussion, but I think this is helpful. Is Schumacher: nature and culture are the two great garments of human life. Business and technology are the two great tools that can and should serve them. So my role is very much in the business and technology, is making sure that they really are used, developing tools and systems that are in service of the place and supporting the local culture and optimizing for employment. So again, this is a question that we ask pretty much every day in our operating decisions. Like, what are we optimizing for? Are we optimizing for, you know, a high rate of return on the bottom line? Are we optimizing for well-being? Are we optimizing for employment? And so I think in all business decisions, your organization understanding what is being optimized for is absolutely critical. And we use this notion of human community, and this is as close as we've got to a definition of really trying to use a whole-minded approach to business decision making. And yeah, so here's just another quote. Again, all of these are pictures of Fogo Island. So this is a cauliflower, as you know. We use a lot of metaphor because I think we have some just different approaches. So the cauliflower we feel is a good representation of how communities across around the world are really connected. Fogo Island is a very small floret. You know, Toronto would be one of these larger florets in the cauliflower of the world. And each of the florets is connected to the stem. And the stem's job, and where many professional people live, is to bring nutrition to the floret and to hold all the different florets together. And what we're, so I think, up against in some of the current finance structures, and this is what we're really thinking about how to orient, is we need to make sure that the stem is not, doesn't become self-serving, and we're not using investment to strengthen a stem, making sure money comes back, and investment comes back to keep strong florets in the world as a whole. So again, and for the very small places in the world, this is definitely where our energy at Shorefast is having to make sure that business and technology are used to keep these strengthened. Often we're asked, you know, how did it come that Shorefast built a hotel? How did this, people will call and say, can you help our community build one too? And the first thing is just to understand the investigative process for economic development undertaken was around this premise of using asset-based community development. So this was first, it's a theory of John McKnight, but it's, we've tried to take the practice and turn the investigative model and then bring in all of the business and economic modeling alongside it. So not just to understand what are the true values of your community, what do you miss, what do you love, what can you do about it? In addition to sort of building social bonds and social connections, how do you use that as a deep understanding for then building a business around it? So Newfoundlanders were predisposed to hospitality, and that's how an inn was built, because that was already a natural asset of the place. And so there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, skills or training development that was needed. What we needed is a beautiful building. Again, these are just a few other guideposts of how we make decisions. Community being the building block, basic building block of human life. The intrinsic value of power and place, and making sure all that we do is true to the locale. And business must be not just for profit. So this concept of, you know, it's not just about the bottom line, it needs to be of bigger value. And that sort of, those philosophies are what sort of brought to the creation of the Fogo Island Inn. And just one of the pictures of the room. We've used the power of design very much in the work that we do. And I put these two pictures up here together just to show that, you know, these two buildings are built of the same materials at different times, but the one on the left was designed by architect Todd Saunders, but he spent a lot of time on with the building on the right, and how architecture and design can be used as a real connection point in a broader market. Just so a bit of background on what is Shorefast. So I said we have, as mentioned, we're a registered charity, and we have three operating social businesses. We have the Fogo Island Inn, the Fogo Island Shop, and Fogo Island Fish. And then on the left side, we also have a number of charitable programs. So on the finance side, we have the operating businesses, and then any surpluses that come out of the businesses go back to the charity. They're donated up, and the charity runs a number of community and cultural programs, which then are also available to people that visit the island. And so it's sort of a circle of learning, sharing, and of economic investment. We operate community business, which we kind of say is in the middle of the pure not-for-profit and the pure for-profit. We've tried to structure our legals that way, and our operating style as well. One of the challenges with running this type of business is finding the and. So this is something that our CEO is very famous for. So if you have to make a business decision between a great idea that you may have, or bringing in the right people, or making sure everyone's engaged, and then the decision of how much money you have, we spend a lot of time trying to find the intersection of these three areas. And it's definitely challenging, because when you're running community business, every action has a very deep reaction in the community. And to try to make sure that you account for all those externalities as you make a decision, that is the challenge, but it's also very engaging work. I put this up, I read a lot of the work of Adam Kahane, and it's this concept of collaboration. It's not about agreeing on the solution or even the problem, but rather agreeing on a way to move forward. And I think that's, again, another community business orientation. This type of doing business is not as familiar for many. And so there's a lot of discussion before a decision is made, in order that you bring everybody in. One of the keys learnings that I've had as a professional accountant in this space is I would like to move things along in a linear fashion often, to make things go a little bit quicker. But really the time of just being in conversation, although it does not always seem like it's moving in the right direction, there's an incredible amount of learning from that conversation. So again, just another backdrop to this type of operation. We talk about capital, and the question that I'm challenged with as CFO is what is the relationship between our economic capital and investment capital, and all these other types of capital that we need to make sure that we're strengthening in our business decisions. We practice what we call right pricing. People often ask, how can it possibly cost what it does to stay at the Fogo Island Inn? Our entry point per night is around $2,000 a night. But the reality is, to operate a business where you're paying fair labor rates, and our labor is more than 50% of the room cost, and offering benefits and supplying from a local supply chain, there is an additional inherent cost, because we're trying to build out the ecosystem, it's not just the lowest cost for that particular product or service. So these are just some of the philosophies that we use. And a key thing that I do is every day I'm asking, where did the money go? And I'll show our nutrition certification mark a little bit later, but really understanding sort of how the money trickles through the system is an important awareness for all of your business investment. With that awareness, we were really struggling with how to communicate, what our buying practice is, how we support local. So we developed the economic nutrition. It says the certification mark. So really, people are very familiar with the nutritional labels that are on food packaging. So we developed a similar approach in that we have, on all of the products and services that we offer, we show where all the money went in terms of the distribution of costing. So people have an understanding of, when they buy a product or service, what it got invested into once it comes into our hands. And on the bottom of the label, we watch very closely is the economic distribution. So we're really focused on trying to have the economic impact come as close to Fogo Island as possible, because we think that's the strength in really the local supply chain. Again, our economic drivers, this is another thing that we measure as a social or community business, is looking at the spin-off of GDP, and we're very mindful of how many people we employ, not only in the direct business that we run, but we're the induced and the indirect. So the broader economic impact is, again, another metric that we measure that's not your typical P&L numbers. This is just some other, our big concerns, I guess, on the horizon, I'll wrap up, is just the changing ownership landscape right now that's underway. And it's a critical issue, I think, in smaller places in the country. 80% of businesses are family owned, and they represent about 60% of Canada's GDP. And there's a massive shift that's underway. And under COVID right now, it's even more of a challenge for businesses to stay locally owned. Again, another just quick one is network versus community. Just as a definition, I think we use these words interchangeably, but at Shorefast, we're very mindful. Community is really, it's very much focused on a geographic place where the relationships are the focus in the decision-making and in the business. It has communal memory, aspirations, and a shared fate. And just approaching business relationships more at that community level is a very different way than sort of a typical business.
Diane, I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah. So, okay. So just on the last of Shorefast, or I can go on. One of the things that we have underway is we think we've learned a fair bit in what we've done, and we're hoping to connect with other organizations, hope that we may be able to serve as a model for other places. So on our mind is whether we will start an institute for community economics from this orientation.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And the photos are marvelous. We've got a couple of questions that we're gonna bring out at the end.
Yeah, no problem.
But yes, just seeing how beautiful it is a wonderful part of your presentation. So thank you. So you can stop share, and we can switch it to Matt. And Matt, I will unmute you. So we're now being joined by Matt Zipchen, who is he's a green building consultant, works in renewable energy. He's been at SolarShare and the Toronto Renewable Energy Co-op. He's worked at raising money through community bonds. So he has a lot to tell us. We're going from a fairly less dense part of Canada to one of the more dense parts of Canada as Matt joins us from Toronto. So go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Ellie. You can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. I entitled my presentation today, The Accidental Practitioner's Guide to Social Finance. And what that means is I've been driven most of my career by a passion for environmental sustainability, environmental justice, but entrepreneurship as well. And so I've been involved throughout my career with young startup organizations, whether for-profit, not-for-profit, or charity. And as a mission-driven organization, you obviously need funding and finance. And so I accidentally got exposed to all these different models for social finance. And so I thought it would be helpful today to kind of walk you through my journey that I've gone through in my career and just highlight some of those different models, especially for those on the call who are practitioners themselves and are looking to see how they can finance their ventures and organizations. So I'm going to start with a quick intro of Efficiency Capital, which is my current venture. And then I'll take you back through some of the journey that I took to get here and highlight some of the models of success that I've seen, then do a little summary and then open it up to questions. And then please, Sally, let me know if there's any issues with the slides not turning. So Efficiency Capital, or EC for short, we're a developer, investor, and asset manager of energy efficiency projects. We were actually incubated by the Atmospheric Fund, formerly Toronto Atmospheric Fund, TAF for short. So TAF is an arm's length agency of the City of Toronto. They were created in the early 90s with an endowment fund, and they were told, you know, you have to live off this fund, but you have to invest in things that reduce local air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And so in the 90s, they really took a look at local air pollution and were a big part of the campaign to get Ontario off of coal. And then in the early 2000s, they started looking at greenhouse gas emissions. And in an urban environment, buildings tend to account for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions. So they wanted to do something in buildings and energy efficiency, and they didn't really understand why building owners or business owners were not investing in efficiency upgrades in their buildings and in their real estate, considering that, you know, efficiency has a positive return on investment. And so they spent a lot of time trying to understand that, see what kind of energy efficiency investment and programs had worked in the past, talk to owners, both direct and indirect research, and they developed a model to basically overcome the barriers that they were finding. And the model they called the Energy Savings Performance Agreement, but we just call it ESPA for short. They ran this ESPA program in social housing for about 4 or 5 years, and 100% success, and said, well, you know, actually we want to see more of this, but we're an agency of the city. We're not really designed to scale things. So let's incubate a private sector partner who can become the sole licensee and provider of this model, with the idea of scaling it beyond social housing, so the other building segments, condos, apartments, commercial, industrial, and then also beyond Toronto and Ontario, Canada, and North America. And so that's how Efficiency Capital was born in 2015. To introduce myself, sorry, I'm Matt Zipchen. I'm president of Efficiency Capital. So what is this ESPA solution? So first of all, when you look at energy efficiency, it's rarely something that is top of mind. If you're running a business, a social venture, you're usually worried about your top line, and then, you know, minimizing your 1 or 2 major expenses. And energy, unless you're in a specific sector, tends not to be one of your biggest costs. And so most people don't see it as strategic. However, it's critical for our dealing with our climate crisis. So what we found, or what TAF found, is that building owners face 3, like there's a ton of barriers as to why they don't invest in energy efficiency, but the main one is there isn't the right capital at the right time. There's a misunderstood risk-reward formula. So for example, BOMA Toronto did a study that found 50% of energy efficiency retrofits failed to meet expectations. So if you're already struggling to allocate capital to an efficiency project, and now you're not sure if you're going to achieve it, it makes it all the harder. And then finally, time and capacity. So we do comprehensive retrofits. We do boilers, air handling units, lights, low flow toilets, and we do it all together all at once, because that's the best way to achieve the best net present value. But to do that on your own, when you're already running your business and you're managing your buildings, to take a comprehensive retrofit across your portfolio takes a fair bit of expertise and time and energy, and most practitioners just don't have that available to them. So the ESPA solution is the idea that efficiency capital comes along, and let's say you're a building owner, you're spending $100,000 a month in utilities, gas, electricity, water. I know that's a lot, but we'll just say, use that as an example. We'll come and we'll do an assessment of your building and say, okay, there's an opportunity to reduce that 100,000 to 70, but we're gonna have to invest $1 million. So we take our funds and put the $1 million into the building, upgrade all the equipment. We own that equipment. And basically we'll reduce that $100,000 a month to 70. So there's $30,000 in savings, and we'll sweep 25 of that 30. So the idea is that the building owner takes their current utility budget, we create some space in it, and we get paid for that space. But by just simply continuing to pay their current utility budget, they get to upgrade their building, enjoy some savings without any capital up front. And then at the end of the contract, we leave the equipment to the building owner. What's really innovative about this model is that we're actually paid on performance. Traditional financing as opposed to investment. If you're a financier, you're usually lending. You're getting paid principal and interest. So if I'm a building owner and I borrow money, the $1 million, to upgrade my building, and then all of a sudden my boiler explodes, well, you know, you still have to pay your principal and interest. In our situation, that's not the case. That boiler explodes, we own it. We're not actually generating savings, so you actually pay us nothing. We are actually getting paid on the savings we generate. So that means we're at risk of potentially a zero payment if the equipment doesn't work or if it doesn't perform. So you can be sure we're going to show up that night or the next morning to fix it. So there's complete risk transference from the building owner to us, which also allows our solution to stay off the building owner's balance sheet, which is really critical for a lot of owners. So that's our basic model, and how this relates to social finance. Well, first of all, we were incubated by an organization that's mission-driven and has supplied, and incubated a lot of social finance ventures or projects. They provide us with a revolving pool of capital to actually fund the initial investment. But once the project is built, we then refinance it with impact investors to free up that capital so that we can go build another project. And right now, those impact investors tend to be foundations who, want to invest with impact, but want to have an asset that is producing stable cash flows, predictable and stable cash flows. The nice thing about working with foundations and impact investors like that is that we could refinance a $500,000 project. The size of the transaction that they're willing to do is much smaller. If we were doing that in the private sector or the traditional routes of financing, you would have to bundle up to $5-10 million of projects before you could go for a refinance. So that allows us to basically do more and transact more quickly, which is great. So that's the efficiency capital, but I'd like to take a step back and kind of take you almost 20 years ago, I guess, almost. This is where it all started, and my first exposure to social finance or those types of models. So I was finishing my master's at Simon Fraser out west in Vancouver, and while I was there, one of my colleagues, as part of his project, he hosted a conference. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was like Super Sustainable BC or something along those lines. And out of that was like all the thought leaders of the West Coast who wanted to promote the agenda of sustainability. Out of that came, 50, 70, 80 recommendations of things that, we needed to do to move the agenda forward. One of them was that, Vancouver and BC needed a first-stop shop of everything to do with green buildings. And so my colleague took that idea and ran with it, developed a business plan, and then basically recruited an executive director and launched Lighthouse Sustainable Building Center. So it was the first center of its kind, and it was an enterprising nonprofit, which I'll explain in a second. And we showcased green building products, new technologies. We provided, market rate consulting services to businesses and industry. And the way it started was really a 14-month pilot project with, again, some kind of key stakeholders, and even, again, it had an incubation aspect. So EcoTrust Canada was a critical stakeholder. The whole thing was housed at the Center for Sustainable Community Development at SFU. And one of the anchor funders was Western Economic Diversification. For those who don't know WED, it's a federal agency that invests in Western economies to help diversify them. So what I've learned here, though, is that being housed under SFU was really, really helpful because we got free office space. We were on SFU payroll, so we didn't have to figure out the HR side of things. We used their back office. We used their IT infrastructure. We were under their liability insurance. So as a startup venture, we got to really focus on the key aspects of our mission and our offering. And it really took away a lot of that kind of startup and setup expenses, which can be quite tedious. And that was my first exposure of the power of being incubated by an organization or having an umbrella organization be part of you. This model, Lighthouse, was actually, we developed it based on the idea of an enterprising nonprofit. So at the time, Atira was the showcase example out west of what an enterprising nonprofit is. And so Atira Women's Resource Society provides shelters to battered women and children, and have done so since 1982. And they have a number of buildings. And then in 2001, they became an enterprising nonprofit, where they realized that they actually had developed expertise in property management by managing these buildings. And so they translated that expertise into actual like a for-profit wing, where they actually offered property management services to other building owners, not even part of the social enterprise network. And so those were market rates, and the profits they were able to generate from that side of their enterprise would then go feed the charity. And that was my first exposure to the enterprising nonprofit and the idea of combining those for-profit business ventures to fund your mission-driven organization. So after my time in BC, I then wandered over to Ontario, and I wanted to learn how to build renewable energy projects. So I got involved with an organization called TREC, formerly the Toronto Renewable Energy Co-op. Seems like everyone who has a Toronto in their name over time wants to become more regional, so they just abbreviate everything. And TREC is a not-for-profit co-op that was created specifically to develop other community-owned renewable energy projects and help launch them. And each one of those logos below is a different organization that TREC actually helped launch and put on the landscape today. And I'll tell you a little bit about more. The first one is WindShare, second one is SolarShare, third one is Relay, which is a charity that promotes, that does renewable energy education for children and does so in local schools, in Indigenous communities. And then Tapestry is a unique social enterprise that TREC turned its expertise in to create its own kind of organization that provides services to other organizations who are raising capital and social finance. And I do have a separate slide on some of these, so I'll go into those. So WindShare was TREC's first foray into community-owned renewable energy. They erected a turbine at the Exhibition Place, which is right downtown Toronto. It was one of the, it was the first urban wind turbine in North America. And to do that, they had a partnership with Toronto Hydro, which is our local utility. So this turbine is 50% owned by Toronto Hydro, but the other 50% is owned by a co-op called WindShare. And so they created the co-op, and the board basically went door to door and into the community and sold shares in this wind turbine. So people bought a share, and the idea that they would earn a small profit, equity-based, of course, so not a fixed return. But it also really kind of taught us about the power of a participatory narrative. People could drive by and say, "Hey, I own a piece of that. Check out that wind turbine. That's partially mine," and that was really powerful. And so, as renewable energy was starting to get going in Ontario in I guess 2010, TREC wanted to do more of these, launch these community-owned power projects, whether it was solar, wind, you name it. So we were, I was part of TREC at the time, and so we were looking at the different models, and a couple of different models that I found really interesting that I wanted to share. I'm sure some of the people who are local to the agricultural world know Monforte Dairy, but here's a really interesting example of a different type of social finance. So Monforte Dairy is in Ontario. It makes cheese. And they needed to basically purchase and develop their own dairy processing facility. They needed about $500,000 to do so. They were at risk because they were using another dairy processor that basically went away in terms of their supply chain. So they didn't have the capital up front to do so. So they actually sold cheese futures, which I find fascinating. So the idea is that they make cheese, and if you like cheese, invest $1,000, and over the next 5 years, you'll get, I don't know, $1,100 worth of cheese. So what that does is that it allows you to provide capital allows you to raise capital to, build your building or whatever it is you need to do. But it also shifts basically your debt from traditional lenders like banks and credit cards to actually engaged individuals who are buying cheese getting paid in cheese, and also develops a more personal relationship with your organization to help make it more successful over time. So I thought this was brilliant. Also on the landscape was Center for Social Innovation. So in early 2000s, a group of social entrepreneurs were really looking at the state of play in terms of rental and lease spaces for launching their social ventures. And there really wasn't much on the landscape. So they came together with a little bit of a plan to create the Center for Social Innovation. They leased a space and with some help with their landlord and a couple of foundations, they opened up in 2004 one of the first co-working spaces in the world. Over 5 years, it started to burst at the seams. The number of social entrepreneurs that were part of their membership was growing. They didn't have enough space, so they needed to buy their own building, which is the picture down on the right. However, they didn't have upfront capital to do so. It was going to take about $6.8 million to buy that building plus renovations, and they didn't have any assets or collateral. So they approached the City of Toronto, not for money, but for a loan guarantee, and which they secured. Excuse me. And what that allowed them to do is that it allowed them to actually, and the other piece was innovative, it allowed them to take out a mortgage that was worth 75% of the future value of the building. So after the renovations are done, as opposed to the traditional bank mortgage of 65% of the purchase price pre-renovations. But even after that, they still needed another almost $2 million in equity to complete the transaction. So they went to their network and they offered an RRSP eligible community bond. And it was kind of one of the early community bonds in Toronto and in Ontario. Not familiar what was happening in the rest of the world at the time, but it was really interesting to see a not-for-profit weave its way through the Byzantine, archaic world of securities regulation to figure out what it needed to do to actually offer securities to its members and its stakeholders. They successfully raised the $2 million, purchased the building, and now they actually own buildings here in Toronto, New York, and I believe there's another city as well.
So Matt, I'm gonna ask you to wrap up so we have a little time for questions.
Sure. So SolarShare, and I can actually get this really quick. So SolarShare is the next solar co-op that we launched, and we were actually one of the first retail community bonds on the landscape. So selling a community bond to an accredited investor as opposed to a retail investor is a whole different world of regulations and procedures and approvals. However, co-ops, like if you're a corporation, you can't stand on a street corner and sell a security to somebody who walks by. But if you're a co-op, you can do a membership drive that includes an investment. So we actually raised capital. We built over $40 million of projects, and we were basically, when we first started, we were in church basements. We were at eco fairs. I think the first month we raised $5,000 in community bonds. One of the last months I was there at SolarShare, we raised $800,000 in a single month. So over the 3-4 years that we kind of established ourselves, people not only invested the first time, but half of that 800 was actually investors coming back for more. And then I'll do these two quick slides really quick. I want to mention Tapestry. So Tapestry is an organization that Trek spun off. When we were doing SolarShare, we found that supporting the back office of investors, so managing their bonds, issuing, the T5s and all of that was actually really difficult. And so Trek developed expertise in managing it for us at SolarShare, and then they turned that into Tapestry. And now Tapestry actually supports and partners with, on a service basis, community organizations that want to do their own community bond raise, and they'll help you do the marketing, help you do the raise, and then manage the back office as well. One of the reasons why we were successful, and then I'll end it here, is also there was a ton of stuff happening at the time that really put everything on the landscape in terms of impact investing and social finance. Mars launched the Social Venture Exchange, which is a matchmaking service for social ventures with impact investors. There's a Social Finance Forum, crowdfunding, and then of course FinTech with a purpose has been coming on strong. In the bottom left hand there, you can see the crowdfunding guide. This is actually something, if you go to the Center for Social Innovation's website, they have a section there that is publications and research. They've got a great guide to crowdfunding if you don't know what it is, and they also have a really great guide for community bonds. So really good resources there. And then I'll just leave it here and end my presentation. But basically some of the lessons that I learned is if you want to be successful in raising social capital, you really have to leverage a financial capital, leverage your social capital for financial capital is what I've learned, is that you really need to leverage your community and your networks and for them to invest in you. It's really helpful to have some sort of anchor for success, whether it's an incubating organization. And then, anchors, whether you have an anchor customer to give you just base cash flows. And then when you go for investment, the type of financing investors that you go after is really going to depend on the nature of your operations. Is it project finance and asset finance? Is it ongoing operations? What's your scale? And then finally, it's not super easy. It does take resources, but those resources are there. There are people with expertise that will believe in your mission, and you have value to provide them in exchange. Maybe not capital, but you can give them experience, engagement, ownership, participation, and don't be afraid to leverage that.
Great.
So I will end it there.
So thank you very much, Matt. That was a great overview of a lot of different options. That's great. So I know we're at the end, but if you want to connect with either Matt or Diane, we can help you do that. These were fantastic models. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. You will get a recording of the presentations as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye, everyone.